The suitcase was already
Then you'll never
packed
have
when
to worry
Adaeze
about me
Okonkwo
matching him
stepped
again.
back into the dining room. Every fork froze. Snow tapped the windows of their small house in Columbus, Ohio. Nobody noticed. They were still hearing the words her father had just roared across the Christmas turkey. "My son matters more than you ever will." He didn't whisper it. He didn't take it back. He shouted it loud enough for the neighbor's dog to bark through the wall. Adaeze stood in the doorway, coat buttoned, keys in her fist. 29 years old. She looked at the man who raised her and gave him one sentence in return. "Then you'll never have to worry about me matching him again." She turned. She left. And by New Year's Day, the secret Chief Emeka Okonkwo had buried for 26 years in the red soil of their village in Enugu would rise up and swallow every single one of them whole. If you're watching this from wherever you are tonight, drop a comment and tell us your city or country. You'd be surprised how many people around this world have sat at a table just like that one. And if stories like this pull something out of you, hit subscribe now, because what happened to this family over the following 2 weeks is unlike anything you've heard before. Adaeze had grown up believing 3 things about her father: that he loved order more than comfort, that he loved tradition more than convenience, and that he loved his son Chidi more than he loved her, though for 29 years he had never said it out loud. He hadn't needed to. It lived in the way he corrected her posture but praised Chidi's ambition. It lived in the way her college acceptance letter got a nod, while Chidi's medical school acceptance got a goat slaughtered in celebration back home. It lived in small, quiet ways that a daughter learns to swallow because naming them out loud feels like betrayal. But nothing had prepared her for tonight, for the shout, for the way her mother, Ngozi, had gone rigid and silent, staring down at her plate like the tablecloth held the answer to a question she'd spent decades avoiding. For the way Chidi, her golden brother, the one being defended, had looked for just a flicker of a second more afraid than proud. That flicker was the first crack. And cracks, once they start, do not stay small. Adaeze didn't go far. She drove 11 minutes to a motel off Route 33, the kind with buzzing vending machines and thin walls, and she sat on the edge of the bed with her coat still on, replaying the sentence over and over. "My son matters more than you ever will." Not "I love him more." Not "he's tried harder." Matters. As if she were a variable in an equation her father had already solved, and the solution had never included her. At 11:47 p.m, her phone buzzed. It was her mother. Not a call. A text sent in fragments, like Ngozi's hands had been shaking too hard to type in full sentences. "Please come back tomorrow. Not tonight. There are things your father should have told you a long time ago, and I am tired of carrying them for him." Adaeze read it 4 times. Things, plural. She didn't sleep that night. If this story is already pulling at something in you, go ahead and like the video now. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. And trust me, you're going to want to see where this goes. The next morning, Adaeze drove back, not to the house, but to a small diner 2 streets over where her mother was already waiting in the corner booth, an untouched cup of tea in front of her, going cold. Ngozi looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. She reached across the table and gripped her daughter's hand so tightly it almost hurt. "Your father did not marry me first," Ngozi said. The sentence landed like a dropped plate. "There was a woman before me, Ifua. She was carrying his child when he left Nigeria for graduate school here. He told his family she'd died in childbirth. He told me the same thing, years later, when we married. I believed him for 26 years. Ngozi's voice cracked on the last word. "I found out 3 months ago that she didn't die, and neither did the child." Adaeze's whole body went cold. "Are you telling me Chidi isn't?" "No." Ngozi shook her head fast, urgent. "Chidi is mine. Chidi is ours. That's not it." She swallowed hard, and the next words came out like they'd been rehearsed 100 times in the mirror and still refused to sound real. "The child Efua was carrying is a son. He is 27 years old. He lives 40 minutes from here. And 3 weeks ago he found out who his father is, and he wrote your father a letter asking to meet him." The diner noise, the clinking cups, the low murmur of other conversations, seemed to disappear entirely. "That's who he was talking about," Adaeze whispered. "At dinner, when he said 'my son.' He wasn't talking about Chidi at all. Ngozi's silence was the only confirmation she needed. Comment below right now, who do you think this story is really about? Because I promise you, it is not who you think. And if you want to see exactly how this unravels, subscribe, because the next part changes everything you believe about Chief Emeka. The name on the letter was Kwame, not an Igbo name. Efua had remarried a Ghanaian man years later, and Kwame had grown up in Cleveland believing his stepfather was his real one, until a DNA testing kit he'd taken on a whim over the summer cracked his entire identity in half. He hadn't gone looking for a scandal, he'd gone looking for medical history, for a curiosity, for the kind of small answer people expect from those kits. Instead, he found a stranger's name, flagged as his biological father, a name he then spent weeks quietly researching, until he found Chief Emeka Okonkwo, respected elder, deacon at his church, father of 2 grown children in Columbus, Ohio. Kwame's letter had arrived 2 weeks before Christmas. Emeka had read it alone in his study, and instead of telling his wife, instead of telling his children, he had done what men like him had learned to do for 26 years. He buried it, and he told no one, and he let it fester in his chest until it detonated a Christmas dinner table in the form of 4 words meant for a son he had never once acknowledged out loud, and a daughter who had no idea what he was even talking about. "He's been talking to him," Ngozi said quietly, "on the phone, for weeks. I found the call log by accident. That's why he snapped like that last night. Kwame had asked to come to Christmas dinner. Your father said no, and I think some part of him was so afraid of what saying yes would mean that the guilt came out sideways at you, because you were standing there and Kwame wasn't." Adaeze sat back, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the terrible clarity of finally understanding a wound that had shaped half her life. Every time her father had seemed distant with her, every time love had felt rationed and conditional, it hadn't only been about favouring Chidi. It had been about a phantom son buried in silence, a guilt Emeka had never processed, projected instead onto the children who were actually in front of him. "I need to meet him," Adaeze said suddenly, her mother's eyes widened. "Meet who?" "Kwame, my brother." The word felt strange and enormous in her mouth. If Dad won't own what he did, maybe it's time someone in this family did. This is the part where I need you to pause and comment one word describing how you'd feel in Adaeze's position, because what she did next stunned even her mother. It took Adaeze 4 days to track down Kwame's number, working only from the fragments Ngozi remembered from the call log, and a LinkedIn search that felt more like detective work than networking. When she finally called him, she almost hung up twice before he answered. "Hello?" His voice was cautious, guarded, like a man used to disappointment arriving disguised as opportunity. "My name is Adaeze," she said. And then, because there was no gentle way to say it, "I think I'm your sister." The silence on the other end lasted so long she thought the call had dropped. Then, quietly, almost breaking, "I've been waiting my whole life for someone in that family to say that to me." They met 3 days later at a coffee shop that felt too small for the weight of what was happening inside it. Kwame was tall, broad-shouldered, with Emeka's exact jawline and a nervous habit of tapping his knuckles on the table that Adaeze recognised instantly, because Chidi did the exact same thing. Blood does not forget itself, even across 27 years of separation. "He told me he'd think about meeting me," Kwame said, stirring a coffee he never drank. "That was 3 weeks ago, then nothing. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake reaching out at all." "You didn't make a mistake," Adaeze said. "He did, 26 years ago and every year since." Kwame's jaw tightened. "Your mother, does she hate me for existing?" "No." Adaeze reached across the table, the same way her own mother had reached for her in that diner booth. "She's furious at him, not at you, never at you. If you've ever discovered a truth about your own family that changed how you saw your whole childhood, comment it below. This community needs to hear that you're not alone in that feeling. And if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me telling it, hit that like button right now, because we are about to walk into the hardest part together. Word spreads fast in families that pretend to have no secrets. Within a week, Chidi found out, not from his father, not from his mother, but from Adaeze herself, who refused to let one more Okonkwo learn the truth secondhand the way she had. Chidi's reaction was not what Adaeze expected. He didn't rage. He didn't defend their father. He went quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, and then he said something that cracked Adaeze's understanding of her entire childhood wide open. "I always knew there was something," Chidi admitted. Growing up, whenever Dad got that far-off look, you remember it, the one where he'd stop mid-sentence and just stare at nothing, Mom used to say, "He's thinking about the past again." I thought she meant Nigeria, the village. I never thought she meant a person. "He favoured you," Adaeze said, not as an accusation anymore, just an observation laid bare. "My whole life, I thought it was because you were the son and I was the daughter, but maybe it was something else. Maybe loving you the way tradition expected was easier than facing the son he actually abandoned." Chidi's eyes glistened, and for the first time in either of their adult lives, brother and sister sat in a silence that wasn't distance. It was grief, shared honestly for the first time. "I don't want to be the son he uses to avoid the son he actually failed," Chidi said finally. "I think we need to force this, all three of us, together." It was Chidi who arranged it, not Emeka. Chidi called his father and in a voice that shook but did not break, said the words that would detonate the second act of this story. "Kwame is coming to the house Saturday. All of us will be there. You can either be a father to him for the first time in 27 years, or you can lose the rest of us trying to avoid it. Take a breath with me here, because what happened that Saturday in the Okonkwo living room was not the reunion anyone expected. Comment, I'm still here if this story has you locked in, and let's continue. Saturday came grey and quiet, the kind of Ohio winter afternoon that makes a house feel smaller than it is. Kwame arrived first, standing on the porch in a coat too thin for the cold, his hand hovering over the doorbell for nearly a full minute before he found the courage to press it. Adaeze opened the door before he could change his mind and pull her into a hug that surprised them both with how natural it felt. Emeka was sitting in his armchair when Kwame walked in, the same armchair he'd shouted from 3 weeks earlier, and for a long agonizing moment, father and son simply looked at each other across a room that suddenly felt like it belonged to neither of them. "You have Afua's eyes," Emeka said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have nothing to say to me except that?" Kwame's voice cracked, 27 years of abandonment compressing into a single trembling sentence. "I grew up wondering why my father didn't want me. My mother told me you died. I found out 3 months ago that you didn't. That you built an entire life, a wife, 2 kids, a church, a community, 40 minutes from where I was raised, and never once tried to find me." "I was ashamed," Emeka said, and for the first time in the story, his voice lost every ounce of the authority it had carried at that Christmas table. "I left Afua pregnant and terrified in Nigeria because I was young and afraid, and my family had already arranged my marriage to Ngozi before I ever knew Afua was carrying. I told myself the lie about her dying because if she was dead, I didn't have to be a coward. I could just be a man who'd suffered a tragedy instead of a man who ran." The room was silent except for Ngozi's quiet, steady breathing standing near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching a confession she had waited 3 months for her husband to finally speak aloud. "When your letter came," Emeka continued, "I panicked. I told you I needed time because I was terrified that if I let you into this house, everyone would see exactly what kind of man I really was. So instead I shouted about you at my own dinner table like a coward without even having the decency to say your name." Kwame's hands were shaking. "I didn't come here for money. I didn't come here for your name or your church or your reputation. I came here because for 27 years I've had a father-shaped hole in my life, and I wanted to know if it was because something was wrong with me." "Nothing was wrong with you," Emeka said, and his voice finally broke completely. "Everything was wrong with me." If you're feeling this moment the way this family felt it, comment your thoughts below. I want to know if you think forgiveness is even possible here. Like this video if this story is affecting you right now, because the truth is, this isn't over yet. You'd think that would be the end. The tearful confession, the long overdue apology, the family gathering around a long-lost brother with open arms. But real families, real wounds, do not heal in a single afternoon, and this story was not finished revealing itself. Because 2 days later, Ngozi found something in Emeka's study she had never been meant to find. A folder hidden behind old tax documents containing records of money, nearly $40,000 over 11 years, quietly wired to an account in Cleveland. Not gifts, not child support arranged through any court, secret payments sent under a false name to a woman named Efua, all while Emeka told his wife and children that Kwame did not exist. It wasn't guilt money sent in innocence. It was hush money, proof that at some point, years ago, Emeka had learned the truth, had chosen to quietly manage it rather than confront it, and had let his family believe years after he already knew better. When Ngozi confronted him with the folder trembling in her hands, Emeka didn't deny it. "I found out when Kwame was 16, he admitted. Efua reached out, desperate, needing help with his school fees. I sent money so he wouldn't suffer for my mistake, but I told myself sending money quietly was enough. I told myself I didn't need to be present, as long as I was providing. You've been living 2 lives, Ngozi said, and for the first time her voice held something colder than grief, betrayal. Not one secret, a decade of them, while I sat across from you every single day, wondering why some part of you always seemed somewhere else." This was the twist the whole family, and the audience following them, had not seen coming. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment 27 years ago. This was an ongoing, deliberate double life, hidden in plain sight for over a decade, discovered by a wife who had trusted the man she married completely. If you saw that twist coming, comment, "I knew it" below. And if you didn't, comment, "I did not expect that," because this community loves being surprised together. And if suspense like this is exactly your kind of story, subscribe now because we still haven't reached the hardest part. The days that followed were the quietest, most fractured the Okonkwo house had ever known. Ngozi moved into the guest room. Chidi, who had defended his father instinctively for most of his life, found himself unable to look at him without seeing the folder, the false name on the wire transfers, the decade of quiet deception. Adaeze, who had spent her whole life feeling like the least loved child in the house, discovered the strange, aching irony that the brother her father had shouted about defending was the one member of the family who had actually been abandoned the longest, and even then only helped in secret, never in love. Kwame, when he learned about the hidden payments, felt something worse than anger. He felt used. "So I wasn't a son to him," he said quietly to Adaeze over the phone. "I was a liability he managed, a line item he kept hidden so his real family never had to know the cost of who he really was." It was Adaeze who finally said the thing no one else in the family had been brave enough to say aloud. She gathered them all, her mother, her brother, and yes, Kwame too, around the same dining table where the shout had started this entire unravelling, and she said, "We keep asking what Dad did wrong, but the real question is what we're going to do now that we know. Are we going to keep protecting secrets in this family the way he did for 27 years? Or are we finally going to choose honesty even when it costs us something?" Nobody answered right away, but nobody left the table either. And for the first time since Christmas, that silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like the beginning of a decision. We're getting close to the end now, and I promise you, what this family chooses next will stay with you. Comment where you're watching from one more time and let's finish this together. It took another 6 weeks before the Okonkwo family sat at that table again, whole for the first time. Not healed, not fully forgiven, but present, all 5 of them, including the son who had spent 27 years as a secret. Emeka did not get to simply apologise his way back into ease. Ngozi made clear that trust, once broken this deeply, would take years to rebuild, if it rebuilt at all. But she stayed not out of obligation, but because she chose, deliberately, to see whether the man across from her was capable of becoming someone new. Chidi and Kwame, against every odds stacked by 27 years of separation, found an easy, unexpected friendship. 2 brothers discovering almost in real time how much they actually had in common, from their stubbornness to their identical laugh. And Adaeze, the daughter who left that first Christmas dinner believing she mattered less than a brother she didn't even know existed, found something she never expected to find in the wreckage of her father's secrets: clarity. She finally understood that her father's coldness toward her had never truly been about her at all. It had been about a wound he was too afraid to face, one he let poison every relationship around him rather than confronting it honestly, even once. At the next family dinner, when Emeka rose from his seat to speak, the whole table tensed, half expecting another shout, another wound to erupt out of him unannounced. Instead, his voice was quiet. "I spent 27 years believing that if no one saw my shame, it wasn't real," he said. "I was wrong. Hiding a truth doesn't make it disappear. It just makes the people who love you carry the weight of it without ever knowing why the load feels so heavy." He looked at each of them in turn: Ngozi, Chidi, and finally, for the first time openly, at Kwame. "I can't undo 27 years, but I can stop running for the rest of however many I have left. It wasn't a perfect ending. Some cracks, once they form, leave a mark that never fully disappears. But sitting at that table, 5 Okonkwos instead of 4, honest with each other for the first time in a generation, felt less like an ending and more like the family had finally stopped pretending and had chosen at long last to begin again. Before you go, subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below the biggest lesson you're taking from this family tonight. Because sometimes the sentence that shatters a family in one moment is the same sentence that years later finally sets it free. And the real question isn't who mattered more. It's who was brave enough in the end to stay.